In 2026, most people don't consciously choose Windows. They simply stay on Windows. It's what came with their laptop. It's what their office uses. It's what they've always known. And because it feels familiar, it feels free. But staying on Windows in 2026 carries hidden costs that go far beyond the price of a license key. These costs show up in your wallet, in your time, in your privacy, in your hardware lifespan, and even in your freedom to control your own machine. And while Windows continues to dominate the mainstream desktop market, alternatives like Ubuntu, Linux Mint, Fedora, Debian, and even Arch Linux quietly offer a radically different experience that exposes just how expensive default can really be. The first and most obvious hidden cost is financial, but not in the way most people think. Many users assume Windows is free because it comes pre-installed. In reality, the cost of a Windows license is bundled into the price of almost every consumer laptop and desktop sold. You pay for it whether you want it or not. In 2026, with Windows 11 deeply integrated into Microsoft's ecosystem and subscription services, you're not just paying for an operating system. You're entering a pipeline of recurring payments. Microsoft 365 subscriptions, OneDrive storage upgrades, Game Pass subscriptions, and AI add-ons integrated directly into the system are constantly nudging you toward ongoing spending. Windows has evolved from a product into a service platform designed to continuously monetize its user base. Compare that to distributions like Ubuntu or Linux Mint. When you install Ubuntu or Linux Mint, you are not paying a licensing fee. There is no forced subscription attached to the operating system itself. Fedora and Debian operate similarly, offering fully functional, regularly updated systems at zero cost. Even Arch Linux, often seen as advanced and customizable, remains completely free. The absence of licensing fees and bundled monetization creates a fundamentally different relationship between user and system. You are not a revenue stream. You are a user. But the financial cost of Windows extends beyond licensing and subscriptions. Hardware requirements in 2026 remain one of the most underestimated expenses. Windows 11 introduced strict hardware requirements, including TPM 2.0 and specific CPU generations. As Windows continues to evolve, system requirements continue creeping upward. Many perfectly functional machines are declared unsupported, not because they are incapable of running software, but because they do not meet Microsoft's policy thresholds. This forces upgrades. Perfectly usable laptops end up in drawers or landfills, not because they are broken, but because Windows says they are obsolete. Meanwhile, Linux Mint can comfortably run on hardware that Windows 11 struggles with. Ubuntu offers lightweight flavors like Xubuntu and Lubuntu that revive older machines. Fedora runs efficiently on mid-range hardware without imposing artificial barriers. Debian is famously stable and lightweight, capable of extending the lifespan of systems that Windows would abandon. Arch Linux, configured properly, can run smoothly on machines that are more than a decade old. The hidden cost here is hardware churn. Staying on Windows often means replacing hardware sooner than necessary, spending hundreds or thousands over time that could have been avoided. Another cost is performance overhead. Windows in 2026 is deeply integrated with background services, telemetry systems, AI assistants, cloud sync features, and advertising frameworks. Even high-end systems feel heavier over time. Background processes consume CPU cycles and RAM, even when you are doing nothing. This means you compensate with more powerful hardware. You buy more RAM. You upgrade your SSD. You invest in faster CPUs. The operating system's demands ripple outward into hardware purchasing decisions. In contrast, distributions like Ubuntu and Fedora allow you to choose how much runs in the background. Linux Mint provides a clean cinnamon desktop that does not overwhelm system resources. Debian's minimal base installation lets you build upward only what you need. Arch Linux goes even further, giving you absolute control over what services are installed. This efficiency translates into lower hardware requirements and longer system lifespan, which translates into real money saved. Then there is the cost of advertising. Windows 11 has blurred the line between operating system and marketing platform. In 2026, ads appear in the Start menu, in search suggestions, in lock screens, and within system notifications. While some can be disabled, new promotional integrations often appear with updates. Microsoft promotes its own services aggressively. Edge is pushed repeatedly. Bing integration is embedded deeply. Cloud storage prompts appear when local storage fills. The operating system itself becomes a billboard. Ubuntu, Linux Mint, Fedora, Debian, and Arch Linux do not embed advertising into their desktop environments. There are no pop-ups encouraging you to subscribe to cloud storage. No system-level prompts trying to upsell you into bundled services. The desktop remains a workspace, not a storefront. Over time, the psychological fatigue of constant advertising becomes another hidden cost. It erodes focus. It normalizes being marketed to even within your own device. Privacy represents another massive hidden cost. Windows collects telemetry data by default. Even in 2026, while privacy settings have improved in transparency, the data collection architecture remains embedded deeply within the system. Usage metrics, diagnostic data, application behavior, search queries, and voice assistant interactions feed into Microsoft's data ecosystem. While this data may be anonymized or aggregated, the fundamental model assumes data collection as the baseline. Ubuntu and Fedora collect minimal optional telemetry, typically with clear OPTN choices. Linux Mint collects virtually none by default. Debian is built with a philosophy of user autonomy and minimal data collection. Arch Linux collects nothing, unless you install something that does. In Linux distributions, the system does not assume entitlement to your behavioral data. The cost of Windows here is subtle but significant. You trade privacy for convenience, often without realizing how much is being harvested. Then there is the cost of forced updates. Windows updates in 2026 remain mandatory for most consumer editions. While security updates are essential, the timing and implementation can still disrupt workflows. Automatic reboots, update bugs, driver conflicts, and feature rollouts occasionally cause downtime. For professionals, downtime equals lost productivity. For gamers, updates can break compatibility. For businesses, unexpected system behavior can disrupt operations. Ubuntu offers long-term support releases that remain stable for years. Linux Mint builds on Ubuntu LTS, emphasizing stability and predictable updates. Fedora offers a faster release cycle but allows you to choose when to upgrade. Debian stable prioritizes rock-solid reliability over bleeding-edge features. Arch Linux is rolling release, but updates occur under your control. You decide when to apply them. The difference is autonomy. With Windows, you are managed. With Linux distributions like Ubuntu, Fedora, Debian, Linux Mint, and Arch Linux, you manage your system. Software ecosystem lock-in creates another hidden cost. Windows is deeply intertwined with proprietary formats and ecosystems. Microsoft Office file formats, OneDrive integration, proprietary collaboration tools, and system-level dependencies reinforce dependence. The longer you remain within this ecosystem, the harder it becomes to leave. Files, workflows, and habits become structured around Microsoft's environment. On Ubuntu, Linux Mint, Fedora, Debian, and Arch Linux, you can use LibreOffice, OnlyOffice, or other open standards-based tools. You can use open file formats like ODF. You can choose cloud providers or self-hosted solutions. This flexibility prevents dependency from turning into captivity. The cost of Windows here is future constraint. The longer you stay, the narrower your perceived options become. Gaming has historically been Windows' stronghold, but in 2026, that advantage is shrinking. With Proton compatibility through Steam on Linux distributions like Ubuntu and Fedora, thousands of Windows games run seamlessly. Linux Mint supports gaming with minimal configuration. Arch Linux often provides cutting-edge drivers quickly, making it attractive for enthusiasts. While some anti-cheat systems remain problematic, the gap has narrowed dramatically. Yet many users stay on Windows, believing gaming is impossible elsewhere. That belief alone keeps them paying for upgrades, subscriptions, and hardware tailored for Windows optimization. Security is another underestimated factor. Windows, due to its dominance, remains the primary target for malware. Antivirus subscriptions remain common. Businesses invest heavily in endpoint protection solutions. The architecture of Windows requires constant vigilance. Meanwhile, Ubuntu, Fedora, Debian, Linux Mint, and Arch Linux benefit from Unix-based permission models and a significantly smaller malware ecosystem. While no system is immune, the attack surface differs. The cost of Windows includes security software subscriptions, system slowdowns from antivirus programs, and the ever-present risk of widespread malware targeting. Customization is another hidden dimension. Windows offers limited system-level customization without registry edits or third-party tools. Deep changes are often unsupported or fragile across updates. In contrast, Ubuntu offers different desktop environments. Fedora supports GNOME out of the box but also spins like Fedora KDE. Linux Mint provides Cinnamon, Mate, and XFCE editions. Debian allows you to choose nearly any environment. Arch Linux lets you build the entire graphical stack from scratch. Customization in Linux distributions isn't a hack. It's a design philosophy. The cost of Windows is rigidity, which often pushes users toward paid third-party utilities to modify behavior the system could have allowed natively. There's also the cost of learning dependency. Staying on Windows often means never understanding your system deeply. The interface abstracts complexity, which is convenient, but also limits growth. When something breaks, you rely on official support or online troubleshooting guides. On Ubuntu, Linux Mint, Fedora, Debian, and especially Arch Linux, users often gain deeper insight into how their systems function. Package managers like apt on Ubuntu and Debian, DNF on Fedora, and Pacman on Arch Linux create a structured way of understanding software management. Over time, this knowledge compounds. The cost of Windows is stagnation in technical literacy. Energy efficiency is rarely discussed but matters. Windows background services and telemetry create continuous system activity. Linux distributions like Debian and Linux Mint can idle with minimal resource usage, particularly on lightweight desktops. Lower CPU usage translates into lower energy consumption, which matters for laptops and large-scale deployments alike. Over years, energy inefficiency becomes another invisible expense. Then there's the philosophical cost. Windows is proprietary. Its source code is closed. Decisions about direction, features, and integration are made by a corporation accountable to shareholders. Ubuntu is backed by Canonical but remains open source. Fedora is sponsored by Red Hat but community-driven. Debian is entirely community-governed. Arch Linux is maintained by a passionate community of volunteers. Transparency changes the power dynamic. With Linux distributions like Ubuntu, Linux Mint, Fedora, Debian, and Arch Linux, you can inspect code, modify behavior, and participate in development. With Windows, you accept decisions without visibility. In 2026, artificial intelligence integration within Windows has become more aggressive. AI assistants embedded into the OS analyze documents, suggest edits, summarize content, and monitor activity patterns. While convenient, this deep integration raises privacy concerns and increases system complexity. On Linux distributions like Ubuntu and Fedora, AI tools are optional applications you install by choice. On Debian and Arch Linux, you decide exactly what level of AI integration you want, if any. The cost of Windows here is reduced agency over technological direction. Repairability is another dimension. Windows systems often rely on OEM recovery partitions and proprietary drivers. Reinstalling can be complex, and license reactivation may be required. On Ubuntu, Linux Mint, Fedora, Debian, or Arch Linux, reinstalling is straightforward. Download an ISO, install, and you're operational without activation hurdles. This simplicity reduces downtime and stress. Corporate environments often argue compatibility as justification. But many enterprise tools now support web-based platforms that function equally on Ubuntu or Fedora. Remote desktop solutions, development environments, and containerized workflows work seamlessly on Linux distributions. Developers in particular often find Fedora, Ubuntu, Debian, or Arch Linux more aligned with production Linux servers. Staying on Windows in development roles can introduce friction between local and server environments. Education presents another angle. Students using Windows may become dependent on proprietary ecosystems early. Students using Ubuntu or Linux Mint gain exposure to open standards. Those exploring Fedora or Arch Linux learn system administration skills valuable in IT careers. The cost of Windows in education is missed opportunity for deeper technical empowerment. Even aesthetics matter. Windows enforces a design language that evolves slowly and inconsistently. Linux Mint's Cinnamon desktop offers refined simplicity. Ubuntu's GNOME implementation feels modern and streamlined. Fedora's GNOME remains close to upstream design. KDE on distributions like Fedora KDE or Arch Linux provides extraordinary flexibility. Choice itself becomes a value. Windows offers one official experience. Linux distributions offer many. The hidden cost of staying on Windows in 2026 is not a single invoice. It is a cumulative effect. It is the cost of shorter hardware lifespans. It is the cost of subscription creep. It is the cost of privacy erosion. It is the cost of forced updates and advertising. It is the cost of limited customization and ecosystem lock-in. It is the cost of technical dependency. It is the cost of treating your computer not as your tool, but as a gateway into someone else's revenue model. Ubuntu demonstrates that a mainstream, polished Linux experience can serve everyday users. Linux Mint shows that user-friendly design does not require corporate monetization. Fedora proves that cutting-edge software can exist within a community-driven framework. Debian represents stability and longevity without compromise. Arch Linux exemplifies ultimate control and customization. Each of these distributions highlights what Windows users often unknowingly sacrifice. Staying on Windows feels safe because it is familiar. But familiarity can disguise cost. In 2026, the real question is not whether Windows works. It does. The question is what you are paying beyond the purchase price. Every time you upgrade hardware prematurely, every time you subscribe to a service integrated at the OS level, every time you dismiss an ad in your start menu, every time you accept telemetry as normal, you are paying a small fee in money, privacy, or autonomy. The hidden cost of staying on Windows is the gradual normalization of control shifting away from the user. Linux distributions like Ubuntu, Linux Mint, Fedora, Debian, and Arch Linux remind us that operating systems can still prioritize the user over the platform owner. They remind us that software can be transparent, customizable, efficient, and free from forced monetization. In the end, staying on Windows in 2026 is not necessarily wrong, but it is not neutral. It is a choice with consequences that accumulate quietly over time. And as alternatives like Ubuntu, Linux Mint, Fedora, Debian, and Arch Linux continue to mature, the real hidden cost may simply be the opportunity you never realized you had.